Hi, Rachel.
Hi. I was looking at how to unmute myself. How are you
I
today?
know, I have trouble with that too sometimes.
Yeah. How are you doing today?
I'm well. How are you doing?
Oh, I'm doing great. Thank you.
Can you hear that dog in the background by any chance? It's my
Little bit.
neighbor's. Yeah.
Oh, that's
Okay.
your neighbor's dog.
Yeah, it's not mine.
Oh, goodness. Well, mine are across the hallway in my office today.
Well, I have a cat, so she's pretty quiet.
If you hear dogs barking, yeah, they're office dogs for the next couple weeks. So, hi, everyone.
Good morning.
Morning.
My dog is snoring under my desk, so I hope you can't hear her.
Oh, that's funny. Hi, Heather.
How are you?
Good. I haven't seen you for so long.
I know it. It's so sad.
Well, that's everybody this year. I feel like I haven't seen anybody.
I know.
Okay, I'm going to give everybody a couple minutes to kind of trickle in. How many people usually attend? Do you guys know? I mean, this is session 7, so.
It totally varies.
Okay.
I think 10 to 15 is probably a good guess.
Okay. So I'm just going to give it to 11:02 and then we're going to start so that we can make the most out of our time together. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. So today we are talking about negotiating the deal. This is a topic that I absolutely love. For some reason, the Market Center always asks me to teach this one. So I hope that means I do a good job. My goal for you guys today is to get as much out of this as possible. I know that we have different experience levels across the board. So I'm going to keep it kind of high level, but if there's anything that we want to discuss as a group, we will. I will be sharing the presentation here shortly. Usually I love being in a classroom where there's great participation. So I'm going to ask you guys to participate today so that we can learn from each other and talk through any of the things that you guys are doing in the field that you might need some help with. So I know last session was making and receiving offers. What were some of the takeaways that you guys got out of that class?
For me, it was just a good, good exposure to how another agent does things. So a lot of stuff was things that I were familiar with, but it was just a great, great perspective on how she does things in particular.
Perfect. Perfect. And what do you guys want to get out of this class today? I want to make sure that we touch on not just the course material, because it's a pretty outlined curriculum, but also some of the things that you guys really want to learn for your businesses today.
I'm just looking for different ways in this competitive market to make my offer stand out. See if there's something that somebody else is doing that might help in this type of environment.
Perfect. It's been a hot topic of conversation for the last couple of years. How do we win?
Yep.
Okay.
I would say that I'm always interested in some new verbiage on, negotiation on any topic, actually in price in particular.
Okay. Okay.
I love any ideas on thinking outside of the box, kind of outside of your typical ways to negotiate. And I feel like one of my weak points is really, really advocating for my buyer clients, because I feel like they're just it's such a hard thing in this market to really win for them and go over and above. But I would love to explore those ideas.
Okay. So do we have any needs on the seller side? So a lot of this I've noticed is kind of like, how do we win multiple offers? How do we negotiate some negotiation tactics for our buyers, thinking outside of the box, some verbiage? Is there anything you guys are struggling with on the seller side, or things that you need help with there?
I'm curious to see how you present your offers, like checklists or spreadsheets, like kind of how as a team other people do that when in this market when there's so many offers.
Okay. 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 Perfect. So all of these things are not part of the curriculum. That's why I always wanted to ask. Okay. So I put my contact information in the chat box so everybody has it right up front. So if there's any questions that you have along the way, or anything that I talk about that you would like to see as a resource, I'm all about sharing. I'll give a little introduction for those that don't know me. So my name is Rachel Alley. I lead Millennium Real Estate Group, or Millennium Group, here at Keller Williams Capital Partners with my husband, Jonathan Tomko, he taught lead generation in an earlier session. I have been licensed since 2015, so about 5 years now, a little less than 5 years. And our business year to date is doing about 35 million in production. So this is what we do all day, every day. In regards to contracts and negotiations, this is where I feel is one of my biggest strong suits. It's something that I love to do. I always joke, if I could just like sit back and negotiate deals all day, I totally would. My team thinks I'm crazy for that, because this is one of the harder parts of the business, is really negotiating, especially in an environment like the market is today, where it's very competitive, inventory is very low, and all the good houses have multiple buyers up against it. So I'm going to go ahead and present a PowerPoint. I'm going to lose some of your faces when I do that. Let me know if for some reason you can't see it. Let's pull it over here. And then anytime I see an opportunity during the curriculum to bring any of these topics in, I absolutely will. Okay, do you guys see this one? The instructor version or the big version?
Neither.
Neither. Okay, how about now? Do you guys see the PowerPoint?
Yep.
We can see
Okay,
that.
perfect. Okay, so like we talked about, today is all about negotiating contracts. And that's why I was curious to know what you learned in your other session in regards to making and receiving offers, because I don't want to totally talk about everything that you had just gone through with that. Okay. Oh. Give me 1 second. Already moving you guys to like slide 5. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to talk about, and do you guys have your participation guides at home with you? There's a lot that references that I want to make sure you guys follow along with. Perfect. So breaking down the common points of negotiation. So this is really our opportunity to kind of talk about the integral parts of the real estate conversation when it comes to negotiations. So negotiations are really the most important part of the real estate transaction. This is where you get to protect your buyer or seller when you're communicating and putting things in writing, which is a legally binding contract, and negotiating on their behalf. Has anybody ever read and reviewed the Generational Trends Report for realtors from the National Association of Realtors? It usually comes out every January, and it is a very comprehensive report, and it talks about where consumers find value in their agent. And one of the biggest things is their negotiation skills. That's one of the things that consumers really value within their agent. And I think this is something that I talk to my clients about all the time. So the better that you get at negotiations, the more valuable you're going to be to your clients, and they're more likely to refer you their friends, their family, and everything along the way. There's also, the board used to provide a class that was a certified negotiation expert. If you haven't taken that or looked that up, that might be a good opportunity to kind of add that designation to your tool belt. Okay, so I want to start by saying negotiations should not be intimidating. I know a lot of agents get really finicky about that. Really, they are not meant to be intimidating. They are meant to allow for a conversation between a buyer and a seller, and the middle parties being the buyer's agent and the listing agent that are communicating on their behalf. So I just talk about it like it's a conversation. So we're going to start a conversation with the seller. We're going to start a conversation with the buyer. And being open in conversation and basic communication skills will get you a long way when it comes to negotiating a deal for your client. So this is, again, where you earn your commission, where you earn your keep, and the opportunity to wow your client. So when we break down the points of communication, you guys have, let me see what sheet is on. We'll get to that. Okay, so breaking down the common points of negotiation. So what's involved in negotiations? Kind of some of the common things that we talk about with our clients. So price, right? Let's just start with that. So price is always, it's the first line on the contract. It's the first thing that we're going to talk about. It's the first condition or term that we're going to discuss with our clients. Now, what are some of the other things that are part of the contract and some of the things that we'll negotiate within that contract?
Timelines, when they want to have possession on the house, any special additions to the contract.
Okay, what would some of those special additions be?
Well, not in today's market, but if they're going to ask for buyer's closing costs.
Yep. Okay, closing costs. So any concessions, anything that we're asking the seller to provide to the buyer or leave behind.
Right.
Okay.
Home warranty.
Mm-hmm. Possession and closing, or closing and possession, right? Timelines for that. So I always kind of chunk it down as to one of the biggest things. And I'm a very process-oriented person. So I always have a little offer sheet. And every time I go to write an offer or review an offer, this is kind of my scratch paper. And so really it's, okay, what is our purchase price? What additional terms and conditions do we have? And that could be anything from a home sale contingency to closing costs, to appraisal gap coverage, anything that we may be offering, or appraisal deficiency. Lori hates it when I say appraisal gap. We have our attorney approval piece. Are we doing cash or are we doing financing? We have our pre-approval, whether that's we're sending that with the offer or we're not. And again, if you're cash, proof of funds, it's really important to send that with the offer. Loan application timelines, what type of loan that we're getting, loan commitment, any fixtures that are included. So what is the seller offering as an inclusion to the property versus what are some things that you would like to remain that maybe they aren't including? Anything that might be excluded. So if they have 50 paint cans in the basement from 4 owners past, that might be something that you don't want to include. What is our inspection period? Are we doing an inspection? Are we asking for remedies? And is there a remedy period? Home warranty we mentioned. Earnest money. So are we submitting earnest money at all? What's the amount that we're submitting? And when are we submitting it? Our closing date, our final walkthrough, and then possession. So those are kind of my hot ticket items that I run on my cheat sheet. And that allows me, when I'm having a conversation with my client, to touch on all of those little aspects in one full swoop and take all of my notes. So that way I know that I'm not missing something. I don't have to call them back. I know what information I need to find out from the other agent so that I can best prepare to negotiate the contract. So a negotiation really is a bargaining process. And it's between the buyer and seller and their agent. And I always say the way that you as an agent communicate with the other agent is what helps provide them confidence in working with you. We get offers all the time where I don't know who it is. I don't know, they never called me. I don't know anything about their clients. I get a lot of blind offers. And that doesn't give me as much confidence in that offer when I'm not sure what the story of their buyer is. So being open in communication, making your calls, and we're going to touch base on this a little bit later, but just understanding what is important to all parties is going to help and be a key component in helping your clients negotiate and getting into contract, which is the biggest hurdle. We fight. Sometimes we have to write 4 or 5 contracts before we finally get into contract with another party. So how can your ability to negotiate affect the outcome of a deal? I want you guys to think about that.
Well, if you're not representing your buyer, for instance, in the proper way, they may not even look at your offer. They may put someone before you.
Right. Okay. Anything else?
I just think it's important that the other agent feels that you're open and willing to come to terms, you know, so that it's a win-win situation for both the buyer and the seller, and they feel that you're just willing to go the extra mile to make sure that the seller is happy as well.
Okay. And really, with you being that middle person and you communicating on behalf of your buyer, the outcome of the deal, yes, while terms and conditions are important, the outcome really is contingent on you and making sure that you're presenting the entire offer package and you're presenting it in a way that is easily received and you're communicating with that listing agent, right? So that's really how you impact the negotiations of this deal. Okay, and I know we negotiate in our everyday life. I mean, I negotiate for whether we're watching sports or something that I want to watch on TV every day, or what's for dinner, or all kinds of different things. So it's really just applying some of those principles to the career of real estate and how we're having conversations. So what are some of the skills that great negotiators possess?
They stay calm.
Okay.
I think you need to keep your emotions out of the situation as much as possible.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Knowledgeable, so they make sure that they fully understand the contract and the needs of whoever they're representing.
Okay. Knowledge. Great.
Listen.
Listening. I was wondering if anybody would say that. Yep, they listen. Maybe they ask more questions than they do talking, right? So asking questions is a big one. Okay. So why is it important to ask questions when you're negotiating?
Don't ask, don't know.
You can, if you're asking questions when you're writing the offer, you can craft the offer in a way that it addresses maybe some of the concerns of the seller.
Mm-hmm. So if you take the time to talk to the other agent, say it's the listing agent, and you ask them a series of questions as you're preparing your clients to enter into negotiations and submit their contracts to the seller or their offer to the seller, how much better prepared are you than maybe an agent that doesn't? A lot, right? You're a lot more prepared. You know exactly what that seller is looking for. The agent's communicated with you. They'll tell you, most of the time in my experience, they'll tell you what they're looking for in an offer, if there are any terms or conditions that would be more favorable to them, whether it's what's important. Maybe that's an appraisal deficiency coverage, or maybe that's closing and possession timelines. It could be all kinds of different things. Maybe they're, they don't want to move until after the holidays this time of year. So a 30-day or a 25-day close is not important to them. Maybe they'd like to stay in their house and take down their tree and then move. So understanding what is important to the seller will help you have that conversation with your buyer client in regards to what's going to be most important. Because price is not always the most important thing. Yes, it is a big part of the offer. The seller is going to look at how much they're going to potentially net with the sale of their house. They probably have plans for that money or to put it into their next house. But also what are going to be the terms and conditions that are going to help with the conveniences of their move, or some of the things that they may need as part of this process. And I think that's a really big competitive advantage when you're negotiating an offer. Okay. So when you make an offer, there are really three outcomes, right? So we're either getting accepted right away, we're getting countered, or we're just getting rejected. And in most cases today, we're either getting countered or rejected, right? Has anybody wrote an offer lately that just got accepted first swing? Oh, Heather has. Good for you. Unless it's maybe on the market a little longer. So most of the time we're getting rejected or countered. And so the counter piece is really our opportunity to have conversations and negotiate, because they're giving us the opportunity to enter into contract with them. So it's really important to understand kind of what those three outcomes are and talk to your clients about that. Okay. So what they want us to do is they want us to look at our book. I think it's page 5, about some of the common points of negotiation. So the first one is price. So while the sales is the primary factor in negotiations, it's not always the bottom line. We just talked about that. I know nowadays we're using a lot of escalation clauses or escalation addendums. So price is really important. I know we talked about language of verbiage. So one of the things that I usually like to do if we're utilizing price and we're escalating it is making sure that we're specifying that on the front page of that contract, because that's the first thing that the agent sees when they're reviewing, right? We're scrolling down, it's the first thing the agent sees, it's going to be the first thing the seller sees as well. So for example, if we have a $300,000 house and we're escalating up to 315, I'll put the purchase price as $300,000 with an escalation price up to $315,000 per the included escalation addendum. Why do you think we look at it that way? Rather than the opposite, where we are saying, okay, we're going to offer 300,000, and then we don't even get to the escalation addendum until page 15. It's kind of that
Well,
first impression, right? So your first impression is that I have a strong offer and we're willing to pay over asking and we're willing to compete with other offers because my buyers love this house. So I always use that tactic right on the front page. Okay, closing costs. So few and far between are buyers getting closing cost concessions. And if they are, what I'm seeing in today's market is really they're increasing that purchase price to a certain amount to offset those closing costs that are needed. Or the house has been on the market a little bit longer, and so it's more more of a negotiation tactic around closing costs. So let's talk about that. If we have a new house that comes on the market and it's Thursday or Friday afternoon, and the whole weekend is full of showings, we could probably anticipate that that property is going to receive multiple offers, right? Yeah. So I think it's important, and I tell my clients this all the time, every house has a different situation. And it's important to understand the situation of the house so that we can understand how to negotiate with the seller. So if the house just came on the market and it's going to be a hot one and everybody loves it because it's super cute and Pinterested all over it, it's probably going to be very competitive. My conversation with my client is going to be very different around that house than maybe a house that has sat on the market 2 weeks and hasn't taken a price adjustment and doesn't have any other offers in hand. So that's where your negotiation brain has to come in, because that's where you get to have a different conversation with your clients. The second scenario, you may be able to negotiate closing costs and ask for certain seller concessions or potentially get the property lower than asking. We were negotiating a deal yesterday where it was a beautiful house. They probably didn't overprice it, but they didn't paint all the kids' handprints off the walls. They kind of went handprint mural in a couple of the rooms. And so it sat on the market about 24 to 26 days. So my conversation around that was a lot different than the other house that we showed in Hilliard at 250. And, we're up against multiple offers. So knowing what the opportunity for your buyer may be, depending on the scenario of the house, is where some of these points of negotiation get to come into play. Okay, so closing date. Why is that an important thing to understand for the negotiations?
The seller may have another house they're also trying to get, so they may need a shorter closing date.
Okay, so the seller may need a shorter closing date because maybe they're closing on another house, or they just want to close as quickly as possible to be able to qualify or compete with the market to get another house. Okay. Talk about your buyers. So why is closing date an important thing for them? Understanding what their situation is, right? So are they in a lease? Are they coming from another house? Do they have another house to sell? What does that look like for them? How do we line up timelines in order to make their move a little bit more transitional and seamless? So I think it's important not to just understand what the seller wants, but also understand what is most beneficial for your buyer. First-time home buyers are great because they're usually coming from a lease. They can typically close quickly, and we know when mortgages are paid. So if we close in December, our first mortgage payment is not going to be until February 1st. It allows a little bit of flex time, right? I know this year we're doing a lot of relocations. I don't know if anybody has had clients relocating between cities. That tends to be a little bit more of a juggle as to when we need to close here versus there, so that there isn't a gap where someone's homeless for like a week, right? So understanding closing dates, not just what's important to the seller, but what makes the most sense for your buyer. And then conveyances. So what are some of the things that typically convey in an offer or a contract?
Kitchen appliances, curtain rods, drapery,
Mhm.
washer dryer.
Yep. So other things that I've bought and paid for in my life as a real estate agent have been a microwave, making sure the hot water tank is not leased versus owned, because if it's leased, it typically won't convey. The smart thermostat, the Ring doorbell. I had someone walk away with bathroom mirrors one time. So there are all kinds of different things that people perceive differently as will or will not convey. So I always tell you, it's always best to put everything in there very systematically, very clear, and very upfront. Other things to think about are if you're in a rural area, the propane left in the propane tank, it's December. The seller has the propane tank pumped and there's $700 of propane taken with them and credited back. We have buyers moving into a house with no heat, right? I'm trying to think about play sets, swimming pool equipment, all kinds of different things, hot tubs. So understanding what that property is, and when you're touring that property with your client, taking some notes about what is left behind, because we can only see so much from a photo standpoint when we visit the MLS, when we're at home writing these offers, but taking a good look at everything. Or if there's additional flooring in the basement or carpet in the basement, maybe that's something the buyers will want to keep for patching and replacing when they purchase the home. Okay, so earnest money deposits. Do you guys like putting earnest money deposits in there? Do you not put earnest money deposits in there? Does anybody have a standard of practice around that? Okay, so I'll just answer. So earnest money to me is a standard part of a purchase contract. When there are no offers on the table, earnest money can be a little bit more optional. However, when you're having conversations with your buyer and seller clients, it's usually something that tends to be standard. And it tends to tier based on price point. So a $500 earnest money deposit on a $500,000 house is probably a little bit low, but that might be perfectly suitable for something under $200,000. So understanding what those ranges are and understanding what your client's ability to get that earnest money deposit in may be. So are we giving them enough time to submit that? Is that important to the seller or the seller's agent? Is that something that they want to see as a good faith deposit for the purchase contract? That's honestly, earnest money is one of the biggest things that I counter. Where buyers agents leave it out, it tends to be one of the biggest things that I counter back in on the listing side. And in some markets, I know earnest money can be up to 10% of the purchase price of the house. So we're fortunate enough to where it's not that big of a deposit here in the Central Ohio market. However, it is really important in some other markets. So knowing where your clients are coming from, if they're not from here, and understand the differences between this market versus a different market. Even little things like title insurance policies. So in Cleveland, the buyer and the seller splits the title insurance policy fee. In Dayton, the buyers pay for it entirely. So if you have people coming from different markets to the city, understanding what they're expecting. Now it's always good because here the seller pays for it, so it's a little bit less of a point of contention. But if they're not local and maybe they own a property here, then they're going to question what that looks like. Okay. And then repairs, so inspections and remedies. So I always recommend all buyers get inspections. I usually would never advise against them getting inspections because that creates a liability position for myself and my broker. And really it's their right to understand what the condition of the property is before they move forward. Now that being said, we do receive offers where agents are not, or buyers are not getting inspections done at all. So that I'll allow to be your discretion. But my best practice is always inspections. And if we end up not getting a contract because the seller will not allow inspections, I usually counsel my buyers to let them know that that's okay, because it's them really taking that risk. Does that make sense? Does anybody have any thoughts or feelings on that? Okay. And then repairs. So this is the biggest one that I see get thrown out. So everything's being sold as is. Buyers may have the right to inspection, but everybody's going to take the property in as is condition. That's one of the biggest contingencies that I see. So when it comes to negotiating, we sit down with our clients and we talk about competitive advantages. And that's kind of what I call my tool belt. So I have all these little tools in my tool belt that we can pull out depending on what they can do and what the situation is. So the biggest things that I see in today's market are, yes, we are going above asking. It's kind of a given on anything. The appraisal deficiency coverage. If we go above asking, they're going to want, the seller or the seller's agent, if they're good, are going to want to see that we can help support that financially. If for some reason the appraisal comes short. And then as is. So the sellers want the least amount of hassle. They're usually okay with inspections. I would always encourage them, but we're not going to ask them to make any repairs. And then coaching your clients on what that means. I think one of the biggest things when we're negotiating a deal is not just telling our clients what they need to do to win, but telling them what it means and why it's important, and making sure that they're fully comfortable with that. At the end of the day, this is their decision. And I hear agents all the time, they're like, well, I told my client that they have to do this, this, and this, and this. Or, you know, I wrote the offer for them and they signed it. And I'm thinking like, oh my God. So making sure that you're taking the time to communicate and educate your clients on different options for negotiation. What are some of the other things that you guys use as negotiation points? We're going to talk about some creative ones. Anything outside of the standard stuff? No. What about, well, something that I'm seeing a lot more now, and I think it's because we've had a lot of education on it and CE and different things like that in the marketplace, buyers are offering to pay the seller's closing costs. What does that do for the seller? That allows them to potentially net a higher proceed, correct? Because if they have $1,500 of closing costs, that offer may not be the highest priced offer, but it may be the highest net offer, because it's starting to remove fees from the seller's side. Or buyers are willing to pay title insurance, their own title insurance, and not make that an expense of the seller. That could potentially save them a couple $1,000s, but it also doesn't impact the sales price or potential appraisal value. So it's a way of giving the sellers a credit rather than the sellers giving the buyers a credit. Now, closing date and possession, the one thing I always like to touch on is the lender will typically lock your buyer's rate for 60 days. After that, they usually have to get an updated rate and a new rate lock. So understanding what your timelines are with your lender and what your client's expectations are, because you don't want to write an offer for more than 60 days if they're going to be at a different interest rate. We don't know what interest rates are going to do in 60 days, right? And then closing date and possession date. So say we close, possession date, if it's going to be an owner occupant, is within 60 days of closing. So you probably don't want to do a 3 or 4 month lease back, because that now makes that property an investment property. And if the owner does not occupy that property and takes out an owner occupant loan, it now becomes mortgage fraud, right? Does everybody know that? Okay, perfect. So some other negotiation tips are just being professional. I think that is huge. There are 8,400 realtors in Columbus. It does not take a lot to stand out and be professional. The barrier to entry is extremely low. So I always encourage you guys to be professional, present yourself as professionals. And at the end of the day, the goal when you show a house and you make an offer is to go into contract, right? So remember, that is the ultimate goal. So that's what you're going to be negotiating around. That's what you're driving towards, and that's what both agents and clients, that's their end goal, is to get the house in contract. Also, controlling what you say to people involved in the transaction. Buyers will assume your energy. So when we talked about what are some skill sets of good negotiators, staying calm, being knowledgeable, helping them build confidence, helping them understand what it is that they're obligating themselves to. If you have not read the contract, I would encourage you to read it front to back. It's changed probably 10 times since I even started real estate. So knowing what the contract says is giving you additional knowledge and confidence in helping your clients negotiate and navigate through that process. They will absorb your energy. And sometimes I think buyers in this market, I mean, has anybody faced buyer's remorse this year?
Mhm.
Yeah. They get all caught up in the emotion of, we're in the house 20 minutes, we have to make a decision in 3 hours. Like, at that point, you're just in competitive mode where you want to win. And so they're almost like playing to win rather than loving the house. And then they go into contract and they go, oh my God, what did I just do? Like, this house has nothing that I even said I wanted. How did we get here? So understanding that they're going to take on your energy, and your job is to keep them grounded and remind them of what their motivation was, what was important to them in the house, so that you can help them make the best decision as you head into negotiations. And whether or not the house is the right fit for them, that's ultimately their decision, but it's our job to have the conversation, right? Okay, and then don't reveal too much. I would say listen more than you talk. Agents tend to be pretty social just by nature, and they like to tell you all of the things. So understanding what your client's motivation is, understanding what they can do both financially and with their timelines and what they're willing to do, and then allowing the other agent to tell their story of their client, right? And I have gotten a lot of great information that has helped me win a lot of contracts just by listening. Because sometimes I say it's twofold. It's about how we can make that other agent's job easy and what's important to them, as well as what's most important to their seller, because they're the ones having the conversation with their seller client. And that seller's employed them and they're going to follow their lead, right? Okay. And then don't be attached to the outcome. Took me a while to learn this one. I used to like live and die by what happened with my client. I was on the roller coaster with them. I wouldn't sleep at night. I'd be all over the place. You do the best that you can. And at the end of the day, it's up to the clients to make the decision about what they want to do. And you get to remove yourself from their decision as long as you do a really good job, right? So you get to show them the house, you get to give them some tactics to negotiate, you get to tell them what the situation is, you get to tell them what is most important to the seller. They get to make the decision. And at the end of the day, I always tell my clients, if we wake up tomorrow morning and we don't get this house over a couple $1,000s, are you okay with that? Can you live with that? Will you be okay? And then I know that they're at their max point. Like, this is all that it's worth to them, right? And if we don't have that conversation, then we get the call in the morning like, oh, well, I would have gone $5,000 more when we're in a highest and best situation. So taking the time to just say, how important is this to you? Why? What's your motivation here? And are you okay with the outcome if it doesn't lean in your favor based on everything that we've presented? And then you just let that be their decision. And it's okay if it's not the right fit. I think a lot of times we try to force things to happen or agents try to force things to happen with their clients to get them into contract. And it's not always what's best for the client. So just being aware of that. Okay. So you guys read all through the negotiation tips. We talked about some of the common points of negotiation. I want you to take a moment to kind of brainstorm how you might respond to some of these negotiation points. So for example, I'm going to give you a couple case scenarios. I feel like people learn through applied knowledge. And if we were in person, I would probably have a whole printout of all kinds of fun things that we're going to do. So I want to touch base on each one of the negotiation points and give a couple scenarios so that we can talk about how that negotiation conversation may happen. So first scenario, we have a home, it's listed for $300,000. We have been on the market 15 days, so a little over 2 weeks. We have taken one price adjustment of $15,000. So we went from $315,000 to $300,000. We've been on the market 15 days. We have had no offers. We have not been into contract and back on the market. So when you're preparing your client and you're talking about negotiations, what might be something that you would talk to them about in regards to closing costs?
And are we representing the seller?
We are representing the buyer.
The buyer
We're going to start the negotiation. Yep.
coming into that situation.
Well, I think I would first have a conversation with the seller agent to see if they have any pending offers. You know, to see if we do write an offer, if that's going to potentially shake some other offers loose.
Okay. So any pending offers or interest? I always ask about, is there any interest? Have you been having any conversations, right? Okay.
Right.
And so what if we don't have any offers? How does that change your mindset around negotiations?
So in this case, if it was a really good fit for my buyers and they loved it, I think I would counsel them to come in a little low, but make a really clean offer. So maybe offer $295, but then knowing, everything else that the sellers wanted, I would nail the closing and possession details that the seller wanted. And I would have already found out if, they were doing a home warranty, and I would, so I would make everything what the seller wanted, but I would offer just a little bit lower on our offer price and just see what happened.
Okay. And so how do we have a conversation with our clients about whether price, like in this example, do you think it's more important to be able to ask for closing costs, or is it more important to ask for a lower price? And how do we educate our clients on talking through that, right?
Oh, if the buyers are going to ask for closing costs for them, so then I would tell them that if we ask for closing costs, that it impacts them because it frees up cash on hand, because that's just less cash that they have to bring to the table. And if we offer a lower offer price, like that could come across, to the seller in one way. And so I will educate them on those two options and then let them make the decision.
Perfect. And working with their lender, right? See what's going to make more sense. So if we're only talking about a $5,000 difference financed over a 30-year fix, what's more important to them? Do they have any projects that they'd want to do when they come in? Is it more important for them to maybe have the $3,500 today than a lower purchase price? So that's part of that negotiation conversation that you get to have with your clients before you even enter into a conversation with the seller, to understand what makes the most sense for them, right? Because then it may make sense to offer a little bit higher, but get some closing costs covered for today. Okay. Now let's talk about if the house has been on the market and it has water intrusion in the corner of the basement and there's no other interest and no other offers. Does that change your conversation or your thought process? what would you do in regards to inspections and remedies on that?
I mean, you would definitely want to obviously have an inspection and have the right still for any remedy process.
Mm-hmm. So in that case, would you advise your buyer to not have a remedy period? Probably not, right?
Right.
So this is kind of an example of why everything is so situational and why it's so important for you guys to see these houses so that you can properly advise your clients. They may wander through an open house and say, I love it, I want to put in an offer, but I would encourage you to go put eyes on it for things like this. So yeah, so maybe there's some water intrusion. So that probably tells us that it's not going to be for everyone, right? And you're probably not going to end up in a crazy multiple offer situation. And if that's the case, that gives you a little bit more leverage in negotiations, whether it's we're trying to work the price down, we're asking for closing costs, we're asking for a remedy period, whatever those conditions may be. Okay. So I just wanted to apply some kind of knowledge around some of those situations to get you guys thinking. Now let's flip the script. So if we are, they're calling for highest and best, there's 10 offers in hand. What are some of the things that you guys are going to do to best position your buyers to win and compete? What's the first thing that you should do?
Find out what the seller wants.
Okay, find out what the seller wants.
The first thing I've done, if I know that my clients want a ready to move in house that's going to be cute in a neighborhood that's desirable, is I've already counseled them to start looking for homes significantly under the price that they think they can afford, and to be prepared to bring the matching amount of cash and funds to an appraisal gap that we'll write into an offer.
Okay. Okay. So what do we need to do to be able to understand their financial position? Talk to their lender, right? So understand where the money's coming from. I agree with you, Heather. If I have a client where their max budget is $250, we're really only looking at things at $230 or below, because we need some of that flexibility in order to be able to negotiate. We're not looking at things listed for $250, $240, $245, $249. We're really giving ourselves the opportunity to find a house that we can be competitive on if that's the situation. Okay, so understanding what their financial capabilities are. I mean, the reality is they're buying a house. We should probably start with where the money's coming from, right? So are they getting pre-approved or are they paying cash? If they're paying cash, where is the money coming from? Do they have a proof of funds available for the amount in which that they're intending to offer? A lot of times on cash deals, they don't get proof of funds. I have no idea why. And I'm always like, where's the proof of funds? They're like, well, it's a cash deal. It's like, okay, but I need to know that they have the cash. So making sure that you're preparing a full offer package with the evidence that supports that, yes, they are willing to pay this price and they have the money to do so. And then also, if they're getting financed, understanding what type of financing they're getting, how much are they putting down? Why is it important to know how much they're putting down? It allows you to understand what their flexibility is, right? So we know that there's lenders in the marketplace that will do a 10% no PMI. And if the buyers are putting down 20% to avoid PMI, that allows us to understand that they have 10% to play with. That 10% could be the difference of them getting the house, not getting the house. It could be the money that they utilize for that appraisal deficiency and supporting that. There's a lot of different factors around that. So understanding what the buyer's financial position is. How much do they have to bring to closing? Do they understand what their cash to close amount is? Do they have the funds readily available? If it's a physician's loan, we know that physician loans don't allow gift funds because it's a 0% down loan. So they're not getting money from mom and dad to cover an appraisal gap if that's the situation. Now, if they're at 5% and they're barely scraping together the money for their down payment and they're just trying to be a conventional buyer rather than an FHA buyer, and they might need some closing cost assistance, your whole strategy changes, right? So the first step, at least in my opinion, is starting with the lender, understanding what their financial capabilities are, and then talking to the seller. to understand what's going to be most important to be competing in that marketplace. Okay, so for example, we have a counter offer. So you've submitted an offer for $250. You are taking the property as is, but you're doing your inspection period. You've been able to accommodate the seller's closing, possession, and timeline. What are some of the things in a counter offer that maybe you as a seller's agent would put in there? What do we want to verify? So say they're willing to cover a $5,000 appraisal gap.
So proof of funds for that.
Yeah. So do they actually have the money to cover that gap if it were to happen? I had an agent this year write an offer that said that they're willing to waive appraisal, but they didn't have any money to cover a gap. And when I said, this is great, we'll accept your offer if you can prove that you have the funds in this amount to cover a potential appraisal gap, it all kind of unraveled because they didn't have the money to do so. So knowing what the terms and conditions are and verifying your counter terms. So if someone says that they're coming and they're coming as is, even if they write the purchase is to be as is in that contract, make sure that there's a 0 or nothing noted in that remedy period. Because they may be taking it as is condition. However, if they have any dates in that remedy period, they could potentially ask for concessions. So they're willing to accept the condition, but they might not be willing to always pay for it, right? They're not going to ask for any repairs, but they might ask for a few $1,000s to help make those repairs after they close. Trying to think a couple other things. So I always counter with the fact that this is not contingent on a home sale. I've had that slide in before, where it was their pre-approval said it was contingent on a home sale. Make sure you're looking at these things if you're representing the seller when that offer comes through. And then they didn't write it in the contract, and it in fact was contingent on a home sale. So you could have very well accepted that offer and advised your client to do so without doing your due diligence and looking at all the details.
I had that situation where they did not write it in the it was contingent on a home sale. They didn't write it in the contract, and it was not in the pre-approval letter. And I did not verify verbally with the other agent. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not always in the pre-approval letter. So one of the standard practices that we have, because you learn through experience, is in our counters, we always include that this is not contingent upon a home sale. Just because they probably can't sign it if it is, right? Or else the earnest money, something will probably happen with that. But those different things. I usually say closing is at closing and funding, because otherwise we have the keys, but the money never shows up. I've learned that lesson. I had a closing where we didn't get money for like 3 days after the technical closing, and the buyers took possession at closing. So there's different things that you want to make sure that you understand on the seller side when you're negotiating. And that's really the bulletproofing the transaction piece. Take the time up front. I know we're all busy, we're all running around. You can put an offer together on your phone, but take the time up front to sit down and formulate your negotiation tactics and your paperwork in a way that it really secures your client and protects them from as much as possible. There's always going to be something that comes up. However, it's our job to really advise them, and it's our fault, perceivably, when something goes wrong, right? Okay. So we're going to talk about the 3 Ps. So prepare. So knowing our goal and knowing your client and thinking ahead, setting clear expectations, being informed, first and foremost, obeying the laws, and knowing the documents inside and out. And these are fundamental pieces of being able to advise a client when it comes to negotiating an offer. The preparation piece is really what helps build the confidence through the negotiation process. And I would say we sell a house 3 times. We sell it the first time when the buyer goes into contract. We sell it again during remedies when we're negotiating those, inspections and remedies. We have to get through that. And then the third time is the appraisal. So we have to get through 3 big barriers of negotiations in order to get to the closing. Does everybody agree with that? Especially appraisal. Maybe not remedies so much these last couple of years, not being much of a negotiation piece, but appraisal. Or even, I mean, inspections reveal all things. So I have a client right now, they're buying a nice priced home, and we were in a multiple offer situation, and we were purchasing the property as is. And we found water intrusion, foundation settlement, the chimney lifting away from the house, mold, all of these things that we did not see or anticipate that kind of got unearthed during inspection. So now we're in a conversation where we're having a negotiation conversation. Wasn't the intention going in. As is kind of always subjective in regards to it's as is until it's not. So understanding kind of what your negotiation leverage is as well. And preparing your buyers, letting them know, do you guys do buyer consultations or seller consultations? Okay, letting them know and taking the time up front to talk them through the process. I give all of my buyer clients a copy of the contract in our first meeting because I want them to read it thoroughly so that when we're writing an offer at 9 o'clock at night, it's not the first time that they've seen it. And I always like put a joke in there, like read it before bed, it'll put you to sleep. But I want them to be prepared. I'm going to talk to them about the milestones of the contract, whether it's on my buyer or my seller, to let them know, you know, yes, we're going to go into contract. We're going to go, woohoo, we love the house. And then we're going to hire someone to tell us everything that is wrong with the house that we just fell in love with. And then we have to overcome that. And then we're going to go through appraisal where someone's going to tell us whether or not it's worth what we're willing to pay for it. And all of the different intricacies of that. Because it's really between the ears. It's really in their mind as to how they're going to react. And if we prepare them and it's not the first time they've heard it, it tends to go a lot smoother. They're like, yes, I remember you told me this was going to happen, and it happened. Great. Well, here it's happened. Here's what's next. And that's part of setting those clear expectations. Okay. Let's see. We talked about being informed. So one thing that I can't stress enough, and we have like at Keller Williams Capital Partners, we have a really great brokerage and broker. But there are great brokers in all these brokerages. I mean, lean on them for advice if there's a clause or a contingency or something that you're thinking about incorporating into your contract. Let them advise you and give you the language, making sure that you're staying compliant and obeying the laws. That is one of the biggest things. Nobody wants to end up in realtor court. Okay. So open-ended and closed-ended questions. This is part of that negotiation piece. And I think this is so important. Really, open-ended questions allow for conversation. And I think Jonathan, when he taught the lead gen session, he talked about this as well. When you ask questions that lead towards conversational answers, you get a lot more information. So it's like the difference of saying, when would your sellers ideally like to close on the house versus can your sellers close in 30 days? Do you see the difference in those two tactics? So what are some other open-ended questions that you may ask?
I usually just say, what else can, I usually say that I read the MLS report and I've checked out all their documents and thank you for uploading all of that. And then I ask, what else can you tell me about the property?
Okay, great.
What would the seller like to leave at the property?
Okay. What about why are they moving? Yeah, this is such a great house, great neighborhood. Why are the sellers moving? Right? Because then we know, do they have somewhere to go? Are they staying local? Did they buy another house that they're paying 2 mortgages on? All of those little things. Okay. Any other thoughts on open-ended questions? Maybe what's most important to your sellers? A lot of times I ask, how long, is there a timeline that they need for a response? How long will it take for them to respond to my offer? Because if they're really quick, then I'm probably not going to leave it open for 24 hours to 48 hours. And that's a tactic that I get to use with my buyers to say, okay, these sellers are really responsive. I think we can get this offer in and we could probably get a response within a few hours. That's starting to close the gap to allow additional opportunity to come in, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I always ask open-ended questions. Now, there is a purpose for closed-ended questions when you're getting a little bit more detailed, or if there's anything specific that you need to know, like does the hot tub convey? Will they move it if they don't want it? Some of those things. But really, kind of being curious will give you a lot more information to help you prepare for the negotiation conversation. Because then you can say, hey, buyers, they have somewhere to go. They want to close quickly. I think if we go in at asking or just below, we could probably get this done in the next 4 hours. How great is that? That's a pretty cool conversation. And that's the strategy piece. Whereas if you have to go back and forth, and you leave too much time, or you don't have the right conversation, you don't have the right things in your offer, then it does create longer negotiation time, which in my opinion in this market creates more risk. Because there's very well an opportunity where another party can come in and be where you're at in your conversation. So time being of the essence there.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So anticipating what's coming next. So really just the next steps of the negotiation. So if we submit an offer and we know, okay, it's highest and best, they asked for offers by Sunday at 9, they're going to respond by Monday at 5 p.m. We know what's coming next. So preparing our clients for that and saying, here's the expectation. We're probably not going to hear anything until Monday afternoon. They've collected all the offers. Here's what to expect. I always let my clients know that sometimes the agent will update the MLS status without communicating with me. And as soon as I have information, I will let you know. But if you see something before I do, let's talk about it. Because that happens more than I'd like it to happen. It doesn't feel good. But then you also let them know, okay, if they accept our offer, here's what happens next. And we need to be prepared for that. So we need to get our inspection scheduled as quickly as possible. You need to get your loan application in with your lender, helping them understand the earnest money deposit has to be dropped off at the office or sent to the title company, letting them know what the next steps may be as well. So that way we're not missing any dates or deadlines at the beginning of our contract. Okay. And then, let's see. I would say pay attention to verbal and nonverbal cues. And then keeping quiet when you present an offer. A lot of times what I'll do in a multiple offer situation is I'll be like, hey, John, I'm talking to my clients. We're about to present an offer. We understand that you have multiple offers in hand. Here's where my buyers are at. They're thinking about coming in at, $15,000 over asking at $250,000, giving a $5,000 appraisal gap coverage, taking the property as is. They'll do a small inspection period, and then we can close as quickly as possible, probably between 25 and 30 days based on what your seller's needs are. How's that sound? And then they'll tell me whether or not, usually they'll tell me if I'm even in the ballpark. So I'm giving them kind of a baseline of where our buyer may be. And then I know to go back to my buyer before we finalize that offer and say, okay, here was my conversation. These are the nonverbal or verbal cues that I got based on what I verbally presented. Maybe we need to be a little bit stronger, or he was really excited and thought we could get it done. Okay. Okay, we talked about some scenarios. Talked about importance and motivation. Okay. Bear with me, I'm flipping through. Okay, analyzing counter tactics. So on page 13 in the participation guide, let's see, here we go. It talks about 3 counter tactics: nibbling, hot potato, and good guy, bad guy, which I think are such weird names. So when we're preparing to counter, this is kind of the negotiation piece. A lot of times in this market, we don't really feel like we have the opportunity to like truly negotiate back and forth. I think that's traditionally what people think as a negotiation, is kind of like this tug of war concept of offering. In this market, negotiation, all of that conversation is done up front, and then we kind of take our swing at it. So if you find yourself in a negotiation position where you're having a back and forth conversation, I think the most counters I've had in my career was like 11. It went for like a week back and forth. But if you're in this position where you're having kind of some counter tactics, they kind of nailed it down to like 3. So nibbling, to me, that's kind of like eating away at little things. So on here, it talks about the action. Once your client has agreed upon one major concession, the other party will start nibbling for additional smaller concessions. So does anybody have an example of that? Or anything that they can think of where that tactic may be applied?
I had a situation, it was my nephew, and I was representing him as a buyer, and we had pretty much agreed to everything. And in the MLS, it stated that the basketball hoop was not staying. And my nephew insisted that he had to have this basketball hoop. And I told him, you know, it's really clear that they don't want to leave the basketball hoop. I did call the seller agent. She told me why. I explained to my nephew. He stuck to his guns and he lost the house. So to me, that was an example of.
I would say, are you buying a house or are you buying a basketball hoop? Because that's the most expensive basketball hoop on the face of the planet.
Yeah. He just felt, you know, they were paying above asking price. And
so he kind of felt entitled to that.
Yeah.
And that basketball hoop was more important than the price and terms and conditions that your nephew was offering, right?
Yeah, apparently so. Yeah. His wife wasn't very happy with him, but
well,
the good news
sometimes
is
they want to win. Yeah.
Yeah, he wanted to win. He's one of those type of people, but the next time around he listened to everything I said. So
yeah, and sometimes they have to learn, and that's okay.
Right.
It's a good learning opportunity for everyone. So I usually think of like nibbling as, and this reminds me of a recent deal that I had as well. This house had been on the market a while. It was a very unique house. The sellers were using a discount broker, so essentially they were representing themselves, which is always fun because like you're negotiating directly with the party or the sellers, you know. And we could not come together on price. They were at $600 or $599, and we were at $550, and then we were at $575, and you know, they were at $590, and we just couldn't. We were like a little bit apart here, and I'm like, okay, what can we do to get it to a price that's fair for everybody, that everybody feels good about, but maybe there's some additional things that the sellers can provide as a concession to make the buyers feel like they're winning and getting more for the price that they're offering. And so I think we ended up having a conversation about the tractor because it sat on 5 acres. There were some furniture items. These sellers had moved out of state at this point. There were some furniture items in the house that the buyers really wanted. So we ended up having a conversation around a memorandum of understanding that went in conjunction with the offer or the contract. There was a a third level theater that had theater seats and a projector, all of these different things. So we ended up, the buyers probably compromised a little bit more on price than they had wanted to, but I was able to kind of nibble away at the sellers in order to provide some additional value to the buyers. Does that make sense? Or little things like, one of the most common things that we see as well, okay, if the buyers want closing costs, we're going to go up in our price, or we'll provide you your closing costs, but we're going to counter with this price. So it's kind of that give and the take. So on the seller side, understanding what's most important to the buyer as well. Like, does the buyer have a true need for those closing costs? And can they not do a deal without them? Because if that's the case, I'm probably going to push my price and have a conversation with my seller clients about, let's increase our counter price to offset those closing costs, because I know that that is most important to the buyer based on their financial situation. So that to me is kind of like that little tug of war piece where we're going to give and take a little bit along the way. Okay. So hot potato. This is kind of one of those where the other party tries to pass a problem on to you. For example, the co-op agent tries to pass all closing costs to your client because their client can't afford them. So basically they're saying, here's an offer, here's what we can do, you know, but you have to pay all the closing costs. My buyers cannot do anything. So they're basically trying to say, here's our offer, these are our terms and conditions. You essentially have to assume these in order to get the deal done. Does anybody have any other thoughts or examples or things that come to mind about that? They're really like testing the validity to find out like if the problem's real, right? So something that I would do in a counter is I would probably say, prove it. So I'm pretty sure if I countered, they asked for $3,500 of closing costs. If I countered $2,500, they could probably figure out a way to find $1,000, right? So I'm going to kind of pass that back. So you're really testing the validity rather than just taking it at face value. And then you'll know if they come back with that amount, that's really where they are in their terms and conditions. Okay, any other thoughts around that? Sometimes it's closing and possession timelines. It's amazing what people can actually make work when it works for them. I hear it all the time, like, I have to have this. This is when I need to close by. This is what I need to do. And then as soon as I get a good offer that challenges some of those things, they're able to figure it out. So that to me is kind of like the hot potato concept of like countering what's best for your client, even though the other party has told you like, this is all that we can do. It's usually, a lot of times they can figure out what the solution is. Okay, and then the third one's kind of the good guy, bad guy. This is essentially where like two people are working together, where they take opposing roles. Usually there's one that tends to be a little bit more friendly and the other one tends to be a little bit more dominant or assertive. So that's always, I always try to lead with being the good person. Let's all play nice in the sandbox together. I tell my co-ops, like, our mutual goal is to come to a win-win agreement so that all parties feel good moving forward and getting to the closing table on time. I think a lot of times people think advocating for your client is being like rough and tumble. Some of the best negotiators and some of the best agents are some of the best co-op agents to work with for a reason. They're very collaborative, they're very understanding. So Now that doesn't, oh, my dog just barked. That also doesn't mean that you have to kind of roll over and take it if someone's a little bit more aggressive than you are. I would tell you, but they mirror and match. So if you match that, typically the conversation will start to change. Does anybody have any experience with this?
So are you saying that if the agent is being aggressive and just hard-nosed, that you tend to mirror that?
One of the lines I use a lot when
position?
one of the lines I use a lot when I start to get some resistance or some animosity, I'll be like, so are you telling me that you don't want me to submit an offer? I mean, they're like, oh, no, that's not what I'm, and then they become my friend.
Yeah.
Or, you know, so sometimes they're like, well, I don't know if that'll do it, or, you know, I mean, that price isn't gonna fly with them. And a lot of times I hear agents talking on behalf of their client. It's very, very common. And they kind of take this defensive position of their client, like, well, they're not gonna do this, or, you know, they're not gonna accept these terms. And so I just let them know kind of more sternly than my normal nice voice that, you know, are you talking on behalf of your client? You haven't even talked to them about this option. I'm going to go ahead and send it in writing so that I know that it gets presented. Please let me know after you have the conversation as to what they'd like to do. Sometimes they don't even realize that they're doing it. So when it comes to these negotiations, sometimes the other agents will speak on behalf of their client without even having the conversation with their client about what you're proposing. So I think that's where that good guy, bad guy tactic can come in. And they tend to change their tune a little bit. Okay, any thoughts on that? Okay, so I want to spend the last, I'm gonna let you guys out early, but I'm gonna spend the last like 15, 20 minutes. I want to talk through some of the other questions that you had when we initially started together. And really in summarizing the negotiation piece, it's really all about communication. Setting expectations, understanding motivation, having communication, being a true professional, know your paperwork, know your contracts, know what's important to your clients, know what's important to the other party, and just be really collaborative in those negotiations. Keller Williams is all about win-win. And so that's really both people, two parties arriving at one goal, right? Okay, so let's talk about different ways to win competitively. This is Terry's question. I think she might have dropped off at this point, but.
No, I'm here.
Are you? Okay. I can't see all the names, so bear with me. Okay, so different competitive advantages. I know people are getting really creative in today's market and trying to come up with ways that are different or things that they can do differently in order to win. And I'm going to tell you the foundational pieces are the most important. The creativity is great. However, if the foundational pieces aren't in play, it doesn't, in my opinion, on the other side, it doesn't really matter. Like, price is always going to be important. And price, not just price of what the purchase price is, but a better insured price. Am I going to have my client or my seller pay for remedies? Am I going to have them pay for a home warranty? Am I going to have them pay for closing costs? If the appraisal comes short, are they going to have to eat that? So to me, it's really foundational. And if you can hit all of those foundational things, which I think a lot of agents at this point in the marketplace have learned how to do that. A couple of years ago, it was kind of fun because you were like the strategist, but now everybody's caught on. And so now we're trying to get a little bit more creative as to what else we can do in order to win. I think the first thing that you need to coach your clients on is getting to that foundational piece. So the basics, do they feel comfortable going as is? Do they feel comfortable waiving certain contingencies? What is their financing piece? Maybe they need to wait a little bit longer to be able to get conventionally pre-approved. Is this really the market for them? So foundationally, I think those are the biggest things that we need to do first, and then the creativity gets to come on top of that. Now, for you guys, what competitive advantages are you utilizing that are a little bit more creative?
One thing that I've run up against is the crush of people getting loans and refinances and how that is making it harder to get a 21-day close.
Mm-hmm.
And so a few of my clients have suggested that they start that underwriting process and get it started before they're even in contract, so that we can tell the seller, like, look, we're already, most of the way through underwriting, or, like a good way through, and we can definitely close in 21 days. And here's my lender, and she's going to give you a call. And
right. Okay. So getting them fully underwritten. Yes, that was on my list. So letting your buyers go through that process already. I mean, it's really cool when you can get a contract and you have a 15-day loan commitment, because the buyer is literally already underwritten. They've verified everything. They've collected all documents. They've ran what they've needed to run. The underwriters looked at the file, and they're just waiting for the property to apply it to. To me, that makes your offer really strong. One of the other things that I'm seeing in the marketplace, has anybody heard of an appraisal waiver? So lenders now, some lenders, not all lenders, some lenders are providing what they call an appraisal waiver. So they'll take a look at the qualifications of the buyer. They'll run this little algorithm through their system about the potential value of whatever property that the buyer is looking to purchase. And based on that, they can provide an appraisal waiver, where the appraiser doesn't even have to go out to the property. The bank has deemed that this property is within bounds based on the purchase value. So it pretty much removes that contingency from the deal. Now, usually I see this on buyers that are putting 15 to 20% down, or at least 20% down. So if you have a buyer that's a strong 20% down conventional buyer, this is a really great tactic or something to talk to your lender about in order to get that appraisal waiver. Because as a listing agent, when I see that come through, I'm like, woo, we don't even have to have the appraiser out to the property. That means we're not waiting on a report to come back. We're not having the risk of not hitting value. It's a really good tool that I see a lot of people starting to use. And then we already kind of talked about closing costs, like who's paying for what. We talked about title insurance, buyers being willing to pay for that. We talked about them being willing to pay some of the seller closing costs. I will tell you, one of the things that I'm seeing that I would not recommend, because I think all of you have worth and value, buyer's agents are reducing their buyer agent fee. But again, I would not use that. But I do see it. So is there anything else that you guys are seeing or using? No. Okay. So new verbiage on negotiations. That was one of the topics that we wanted to talk about. So with this question, talk to me a little.
I lost your sound, Rachel. I don't know if everyone else did or not.
Yeah, I can't hear anything.
Okay, can you guys say that again? Because I think I lost you for a second. I don't know if I can hear anybody.
Could you repeat your question?
Okay, I'm back.
I think there's two of you now. You're on mute.
Okay, how about now?
I can hear you now.
I don't know what happened. Technology just decided it didn't like me for about 3 minutes. Okay, so we were talking about verbiage on negotiations. So tell me a little bit about what that means, what you guys are looking for, and I'm sorry that I missed it. I think we had a couple people. Melody, I know you were chatting about it.
Yeah, what I was thinking, and I've gotten some of it out of this already, which has been great, is just some of the language that you use. So when you're negotiating, like one of them that you said, so are you telling me you don't want me to submit an offer? Like that's great verbiage to use. So that's the kind of thing I was thinking about.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, really I think open-ended questions is what it comes down to. And it depends on what challenges you're facing. So if there's any specific situations that you guys have had or challenges that you're facing, let me know and we'll talk through that. Every conversation and every situation, every buyer, every seller, every house is different and everybody has different needs. So the same tactics that you use for one party could be completely different for another party. And I think that's the opportunity to really learn the negotiation piece of this business, because that's what's going to make you an awesome agent. You guys are already awesome, but that's really the differentiating factor in how you can best service your clients. So asking the open-ended questions. I mean, just changing your verbiage around communication on that will get you a lot more information so that you know how to best advise your clients. Don't make any assumptions. I think we make a lot of assumptions, especially this time of year, where we were getting beat to heck in the spring and summer and everything had 20 offers and it was this whole scenario of this is what we had to do to win. The conversation changes all the time. So my conversations now are different than what they might have been in the spring. Don't assume that the house has offers on it. Don't assume everybody's paying $20,000 over asking. Don't assume that there's this appraisal gap coverage. So I wouldn't assume any of those things. And that's why communicating with that listing agent is really important. This time of year is when we have less listings overall in the market, which also means we have less buyers in the market. The people that are shopping right now are really motivated for one reason or another. Nobody just like willy-nilly decides to list their house in December. They're usually going somewhere, or they have somewhere to be, or their lease is up, or they have a job change, or they're motivated around something. But knowing that there's less buyers in the market overall, as well as less houses, the conversation is changing.
So as a seller's agent and the buyer's agent calls you, how much information are you willing to share? I mean, obviously you want to have the seller's permission to share whatever information, but are you,
yeah,
do you
I'm
feel
always
it's better to share everything that you can, or do you feel it's better to hold back and let them
So for
basically come up
example,
with their highest and best.
yeah. So a lot of times, you know, if I'm on the seller side, I feel like you guys are going to use this against me someday. If I'm on the seller side, I mean, I'm just honest with you. I let you know, here's what my sellers would like in an offer. Here's the activity that we've had. I might not tell you exactly how many showings we've had or how much interest we've had. I'll tell you, we've had, you know, our showing started Friday. They're going through the weekend. I don't have anything in hand. I would absolutely encourage an offer. I always encourage an offer. If there's anything specifically that my seller would like that we've communicated about, I will let them know. But really having the conversation based on what my seller wants me to do or what's most important to them. Because I know if price is not the most important thing to them, but timing is, if there's a buyer that can accommodate that for them, I'm always encouraging an offer. You know, right now I'm negotiating a deal where the offer came in $120,000 under asking. That's fun. But you know, it's still worth a conversation because people will surprise you as to what they will or will not do. And if I don't have anything in writing to have a conversation around, if I don't have anything real, then I don't have the opportunity, or my sellers don't have the opportunity to secure a contract on their house. And I think right now we're in the part of the market where there's a lot of buyer fatigue. And if you hype up things too much, you almost deter people from taking action. And then you might have missed out on a really great opportunity to be in contract with a great buyer and seller, and all parties could have been satisfied. That makes sense?
Yes.
So I always have opportunity conversations. Great, send over the offer. I'd love to talk with my clients about that. I'm not sure how they're going to respond, but I'd like the opportunity to talk with them. Maybe we can work out something that works for everybody. Okay. And honestly, when you can advocate and like build a relationship with another agent, they kind of like want to work with you. They want to make it work. They want to coach their clients on how to make it work. Everybody tends to work together. And that's pretty cool. Okay. Okay, ideas on thinking outside of the box, advocating for buyer clients. I like to share my buyer stories. I mean, you know how long someone's been in the house, right? I mean, the auditor will tell you this is the last time they bought and sold it. You know, walking through probably who lives in the house, how they lived in the house, why they chose that neighborhood, what's important to them. When you can share some of that with, or share at least why your buyers love that house as well. Nobody wants to sell a house to someone that doesn't love the house. I've never, on, you know, my house, I'll probably give it away because I would rather give it away than give it to someone that doesn't love it. Jonathan and I, when we lived in Victorian Village, we gave our apartment to another agent in this office because we would rather them have it because they loved it and they were building a life together than not. So letting the other agent know that, hey, my buyers love this house. This is their intention. You know, this is why this house is important to them. I think it's okay to share those things. And then they kind of like root for you, you know? So it's a little bit of that personal connection. So at the end of the day, yes, this is a transaction. Yes, this is a negotiation. But this is really their lives. This is where they're going to plant their roots. This is where they're going to be with their family and their loved ones. And this is going to be important to them. And I think kind of that dream of home ownership is kind of fun to share between agents so that they can have the same conversation with their seller. And I know if I have someone that loves one of my listings, I share that with my seller. You know, we can work with them to try to make it the best terms and conditions, or if they're not the highest and best, sometimes they're just not it. But I do think it matters. We don't do love letters. We don't do things like that, but I like to share how my buyers are qualified and why they're motivated to get this to closing? If you were a buyer's agent and you're like, well, they could take this at one or another one, it doesn't really matter to them. How much confidence does that give the seller? Probably not a lot.
So do you just do do you convey these things over the phone or an email or just over the phone?
Phone. And so one of the other questions was how I present offers. So I know Katie, and she just dropped off, but how I present offers. So I prepare, it's kind of an offer presentation email template that I have. And I adopted this from another agent a few years ago and I've tweaked it since, but basically I want to be able to present my offer to the agent in a way that I want them to present it to their client. Because in the beginning, remember that slide where it was like buyer, buyer's agent, seller's agent, seller. So I want to manage that process as much as possible. So in that breakdown, yes, I put all of the major terms and conditions, everything that listing agent would need to know. Sometimes I'll loop in the lender so they can verify the pre-approval or the buyer's financial position. And then that's where I may put in something like the buyers absolutely love this house. They could tell it was very well maintained. They're really excited about the opportunity to be the next owners. We look forward to the opportunity to work with you, whatever that may be, obviously within the confines of fair housing. But I think it's important to present your offer professionally. And you don't know how other agents are going to present this to their seller. You don't know if they're just going to forward them a 14-page legal contract. And this gives me the opportunity to say, here's how I want you to pass this along. Make sense? Okay. Then on the seller side, I do have an offer spreadsheet. It's evolved over the years with all the terms and conditions, and it's a side-by-side. And I keep that pretty objective, pretty clear with terms and conditions. I not only send over the offer documents, but I send over a breakdown. If it's just one offer, it's in a presentation email, kind of like I do with the buyer presentation to the listing agent. I present that in the similar format to my seller client. If it's multiples, I'll send them kind of my spreadsheet breakdown, but I'm always having a conversation. So I'll let them know, hey, I'm sending you this for your review. I've broke it down. Let me know when a good time to give you a call to talk through it is. And that's my opportunity to share some of the other things that I know that are intangibles of the process. Have I heard from the agent? Have we been in communication? What is the motivation of all the parties involved? What can and cannot they not do? So what other questions, thoughts, scenarios do you guys have that you'd want to talk about? Speak now or forever hold your peace now. Okay, well then I'm gonna let everybody wrap up. I thank you all for being here. I tried to stick to the curriculum as much as possible. I do also tend to teach a CE class about multiple offer negotiations once or twice a year. And that's where I take the opportunity to really dive into different scenarios, counter offers, presentation breakdowns, like all the nitty gritty of negotiating and presenting offers. So if you see that come up, I'd love to have you in class. And then if you need anything or have any other questions after this, I put my email in here in the chat box. So feel free to take that down and send me anything that would be helpful. I am always more than willing to help or coach or teach. I think agents all over the market center, they call me every now and again and ask me how to do something or what this means or what would I do. So I'm always more than willing to help. Okay.
Thank you so much. This was great.
Yes,
I hope you guys
thank you,
got
Rachel.
something out of it.
Very,
Thank
very
you, great
good.
info.
Okay. You guys have a
Thank
great
you.
day. Thank
Thanks
you
a
guys.
bunch.
Bye.